Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 8th annual NYC Web Fest. I'm here with my good friend, Audrey Hepburn, with an iconic New York movie. I just want to welcome you guys to our first live. I'm going to be joined by Kathleen Simmonds and Annie Sundberg for the first live of the weekend. Thank you to everybody that's tuned in. Thank you to the NYC Web Fest team, the jury members, the presenters, everyone. I will definitely be seeing you guys throughout the weekend live on here. And of course, everyone will be watching the films as well on demand. But I'm going to bring in Kathleen Simmonds and Annie right now, and I will throw it to Kathleen.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much, you guys, for this. I will let you guys to it. Annie, it's lovely to meet you virtually. Kathleen, always lovely to see you again. Thank you again. You and Joanna, you're such a part of the WebFest family now all these years. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this and for bringing Annie into this as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great conversation.
Yeah, we will.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Simmonds. For those of you who don't know me, I have been on the jury in the past for NYC Web Fest, and I've supported Lauren with some moderating and on panels in previous years. And I'm incredibly honored to be moderating this fireside chat with my dear friend and mentor and colleague, Annie Sundberg. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you.
Now, all of you may have done a little bit of research on Annie, but just some highlights from her bio. Annie Sundberg is an award-winning filmmaker based in New York City. Her films have been twice shortlisted for the Oscars and earned multiple Emmy and Peabody nominations, among many, many, many other honors. Her production company, Breakthru Films, is home to a variety of projects, including feature films and multi-part non-fiction series for Netflix, HBO, Amazon, CNN, AMC Sundance. And can we just keep going, Annie? And you may have seen the Emmy-nominated Reversing Roe on Netflix, which I worked with Annie on, Marathon, The Patriots Day Bombing on HBO, Surviving Jeffrey Epstein on Lifetime Channel, Emmy-nominated Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work on IFC Showtime, and a bunch of other.
You also worked with us on, on Preppy Murder.
True.
Death in Central Park. So yeah.
True. And on the Patriots Day bombing. So yeah, we've done some work together over the years, Annie, and I know you're an incredibly busy woman, so we're very lucky to have you for this hour. I want to make the most of our time for everybody in the audience and make sure we're tailoring our discussion to their interests. So I have a bunch of questions that I have prepared, but all of you feel free to start putting in your questions into the chat now so that we can move on to those as soon as possible and make sure everybody's getting what they need out of this session. But let's just start, Annie, because I want to know from the beginning, what was your entry into the world of film? What was the catalyst for you becoming a filmmaker?
Right. Well, I went to Dartmouth, which is not known for having a robust film department, but I think every school now, I mean, it's interesting to see the evolution of different arts groups. When I was up there, I mean, it's so many years ago now, but I had a really incredible film teacher, and I had always thought I was going to veer toward narrative. I really love scripted projects, but we had he had been a blacklisted screenwriter, and he turned to documentary in his own career and found it incredibly satisfying. So he taught this really phenomenal documentary production course, and I made a documentary in college that really, that was just incredibly satisfying. And I think, sort of always, that was sort of my first love affair with nonfiction. And then after I graduated, it's just like, it's networking. It's like anybody, you want to work in film. So at the time, it's like looking at production in each state, trying to figure out what was happening. And it just happened that there was a feature film that was shooting in the state where I went to college. And it was Sundance Institute funded. And it was at the time when indie film was really on the rise. So I applied for it, and I became the assistant to the director. And so I was doing script revisions. I mean, my job consisted of going at 5 a.m. and pulling the director out of like a haze of sleep to try to get him dressed to set. He and his wife at the time would argue it was just such a nightmare, Kathleen. They had put an additional mortgage on their house to finance part of the making of this film. This is total independent film back when people were doing it with investment, Sundance Institute support, and their own credit cards. Oof. But it was a really, really amazing shoot because we worked with some really great actors, including, the crazy Rip Torn. And I learned a lot on that project, and I did everything. I mean, I sat with a script supervisor. I was, helping to look at dailies in the evening and organizing how we were watching them. It was soup to nuts feature filmmaking 101. And I think that job was really helpful. It was a union shoot. So I was talking with the line producers. We were negotiating a lot of things every day. And it was definitely trial by fire because they didn't have money to fully staff it. So, you could take whatever job you wanted, basically, if you just were diligent, capable, and available. So that was a really great experience. And I remember coming out of that thinking, okay, I really fully cemented my desire to continue in filmmaking. And I had seen enough production through that experience that I then kind of raced to New York City. And I was lucky in that I had housing with my sister. So I didn't have to worry about how I was going to pay my rent for the first 4 weeks when I was looking for jobs. And I basically was cold calling people. And I think that that's part and parcel of this industry. It's like any arts industry. You can't be afraid to pick up the phone. You look at people who are working in the realm that you want to be working in, and you just cold call. And I was lucky. I mean, it's so funny now because of the fallout with Harvey Weinstein, but at the time, Miramax was the shop that was making all of the big independent films. And I just kept cold calling Trey Hoving. And her assistant had no idea who I was, or that she shouldn't put me through to Trey Hoving at the time. So I had a great conversation with the woman who was heading up, development and acquisitions. So I ended up, I started reading coverage for her. She introduced me to my first job in development. And this was all in feature, in narrative work. And then it was kind of a funny story because I think everyone should have the experience of getting fired once. I also think that's a really healthy experience to have. And mine came because I think you'll understand sort of what matters to you and why you get fired. Mine came because I was working for an independent filmmaker in doing development for her company. And she had a lot of attitude and she was very frustrated. We were casting, it was Thanksgiving weekend. We were casting for, it was sort of a really beautiful project that unfortunately could never get made today, but it was a narrative. It was slightly historical. We had Christian Bale, Ashley Judd, and we were looking for the third lead. And she was convinced it had to be one of like 8 actors who were like the go-to hot actors at this point. So it was at that time, it was Ethan Hawke, Robert Sean Leonard. I'm trying to remember who else was on the short list. And she had me pleading with them to come in to read for her the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving because everything was around her schedule. And I just remember basically having, these weren't offers. These were asking actors to come in and read for her. And we had a showdown in the office. And I basically said, it's not going to happen. Your ego's not big enough, to compel them to and so I got fired. But it was a really great experience. So I remember on Monday morning, she's like, don't bother coming back to work. So I called up a colleague and she said, it's probably a good thing because, it's just, again, it's the value of having a network. And it's just, even when I was working for this office, I would constantly go to industry events. I was meeting people all the time. I would, figure out what films were screening where. I would talk to the people who were distributing them. I would talk to the people who were producing them, the directors. And so I called my friend immediately afterwards. I said, well, I think I'm looking for a job. And she said, well, I have a lead on one, but it's documentary. Are you okay with that? And so again, I think my other advice is say yes. You can always leave if it's absolutely not the right fit, but in your early years, say yes. It's so helpful to understand a variety of approaches to filmmaking. So I worked on a documentary series that was remarkable. It was a 10-part series called The History of American Film. And so it was like my film school. And it was on PBS, and it was fantastic. And I saw that thing soup to nuts. And then out of that came the next introduction and the next introduction.
Yeah.
So I was lucky, but I also was unafraid to call people. And I was also unafraid to kind of hold my ground. And in some ways, getting fired from that job spun me into a really rich career in documentaries.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Amazing. And am I right in saying that you worked for a network at one point?
Yep, I worked for HBO because it was out of doing the 10-part series about American film that one of the editors there knew a project that was searching for a good associate and story producer at HBO. So I went in and I interviewed and I got it. And that film won the Oscar. So it was sort of, I went from that thing to this wonderful in-house project at HBO that was a short film. And then that, again, you know, you work there. And once you're in, when I was at HBO, and I think this is also, it's kind of valuable to have, I feel like we're all working in our living rooms right now, but I'm glad I had the experience of working in a larger corporate structure to also understand how things get processed.
Right.
If something unsolicited comes through, you know, how do you handle it? Who ever pays attention to it?
Yeah.
Who are the agents that you work with? How do you receive materials? How do you vet them? How to budget when you actually have a real budget? You know, things that you think about having access to that you never have access to when you're hustling on your own, from in-house PR teams to legal to insurance. You know, so it's sort of great to have, like, again, a perspective on what it's like to produce something within a system as opposed to outside. So.
And now, I mean, they're providing the funds for a lot of projects, and you transitioned into starting your own production company with a partnership. But
this was the second time I got fired. Shall I tell that story?
Yeah, please do.
Because I think that, again, it's sort of like you learn what matters. And I, at the time, so I'd gone out from HBO to, I got poached to do some work in, New York Times was developing a new television unit at the time. And now you've seen OpDocs and some of the things that they're doing. They were doing different projects that were more frontline based at the time. So I worked from them, and then I got picked from them to go to another group that was launching 2 series. And so at this point, I was doing what is considered to be show running. So you're overseeing the hiring, you're overseeing the story arc of your series, you're watching dailies. You're not in the field directing, but you're basically running the shows. And so you have a sense of what's going to happen over 10 episodes or whatever it is that you're making. And these were nonfiction series, but they had narrative arcs to them. So I remember at one point, we were probably halfway through delivering this series, and I was working on my own projects in my own time.
Yeah.
My own projects started to seep further and further into the time that I was working for this other project. And I remember having this come to Jesus moment where I talked to the executive producers, and they basically said, "Your head's not in this, is it?" And I had started working on a film. This was The Trials of Daryl Hunt, which took forever to make. But we were in the process of writing grants. We had shoots. It was about a wrongful conviction in the Carolinas. And the deeper I got into it, it was the only thing I really cared about. And so it was very clear to me, and it was clear to the people who I was working with, that my heart wasn't in their work. And so they basically said, "You have a choice. You know, we're thinking that we should just release you from this point but do you really want to stay here?" And I basically said, "I don't really want to stay here." And it was hard to walk away because it was at that point the best weekly rate that I had been offered on anything. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have any of the benefits, but I had a really good paycheck.
Yeah.
And I said, "I'm not your gal." And I left. So.
Wow, it's pretty brave.
Yeah. But it was tricky because I just know that had I stayed, it was a combination of knowing that the film may not get made if I stayed, and knowing that I really wanted to make it.
Yeah.
So.
And do you feel like now you're better at recognizing in yourself that moment that they did in you, that, you know, I'm doing something right now, which
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like you can tell now, I think you get so much more adept at that as you move on, the things that are worth it, the things where your passion is really going to be satisfied. Because, you know, yes, you can make a short film quickly, but most films take a long time. And I honestly think that most films that don't make a splash are not because they're not good films. I just think it's because people run out of steam and they lose perseverance, because so much effort goes into making the thing, but nobody realizes what it means to give birth to that on the other side of it. So any project that you do is going to take 3 times as long as you think it's going to take, because you're going to be living with it as it goes live in the world. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I talked about in our last year at the festival. Was for me as a filmmaker, I've obviously made bigger projects with you, but I've also done my own web series. And something that a lot of filmmakers don't plan for at the beginning when they're starting out is you need to plan for the end. You need to plan for the time it takes and money it takes for distribution and for advertising and all of those things that come afterwards. And that's a stuff that filmmakers are passionate about, right? Because it's the story part of it's done.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that that's part of what so again, like developing a network so that if you even have friends who are willing to give you something for a less than normal rate, like, I mean, just knowing that you can lean on it, don't lean on it too hard, but just knowing that, like, at the end of it, if you have someone who works in PR, if you have someone who works in X, Y, and Z, because no one, especially for the early projects before you have a name or a track record or a good festival submission and play, people don't know, they don't know what they don't know. And you have to basically be willing to carry yourself into the world. And I think that's why I think so many films, I mean, it's amazing. It takes so much energy, but if you can stick with a project far after completion, it's, it's incredibly worth it.
Right. And you now, later on later in your career, you now have great agency representation. I'm interested in that. Is that important for a director or filmmaker? And how do you go about securing something like that?
Agents are tricky. I mean, I wanted one for so many years and we weren't getting signed. And I could say at one point that was incredibly sexist. Now I feel like it's evolved so much more in terms of like who gets a seat at the table. Like the DEI work that's happened across the industry has been phenomenal. I think what was happening at a time when I was coming up is that you could be a male director and you could be a female director. And at that point, it sounds so like quaint to say that it was just like, binary in terms of gender. Because, God forbid you were like a director, like a person of color director coming in with something. But the white guys were getting all the agency support. They were also getting the commercial gigs. And so it was really interesting. I had a colleague, Brett Morgan, who I just remember we did very similar films. He got signed immediately by William Morris. And he was immediately picked up by a commercial house. And all of a sudden he had a great day rate as a director. And we were still struggling. And our films had been equally sort of lauded in a couple sort of key years. And that, it took me a while to then circle back to agency. And we never had a signing that was a splashy, like, oh, CAA is signed, directors Ricky and Annie. And sometimes they will do that. They didn't do that with us. But all of a sudden we got a call for a project where they thought, okay, we have something that might work for you as a director. Are you interested in talking? And it only came after we had this body of work. And then they realized, we think we can make money off these guys. And so let's have a conversation. So that was when we signed with CAA and we had them sort of basically, we went out on a bunch of projects that they were selling on our behalf. They attached us to projects. They introduced us to other production companies. And that was how our agency relationship happened. Some people are much more aggressive about agency and they will basically talk to friends who are represented, find out who their agents are, have their friends make introductions, send over clips of their work. We didn't do that. For us, it was literally like, Joe wants, as this project and, Gina's got this other thing and are you interested in taking it out and, attaching yourselves as directors.
Okay. So. Interesting. And so do you think, I mean, I know that they're now, you're now getting more and more approaches about show running. Sorry.
One thing I just want to quickly say about agenting, because I think it's important. If you have a track record, if you have shorts, if you have films, if you have things that you, that will justify yourself in the marketplace, agents are easy to get because they want to make money, and if it's an easy tee up, all the better. Where agents have value is I lean into our agents more for information and intelligence. So they're more valuable for directors than they are for producers in the sense that there's a side of CAA that's basically film finance and strategy. So they're taking filmmakers with ideas and going out to people who have pockets of money or companies that provide financing. But for example, I just spent half the morning sending out pitch emails to the same people that CAA would on a totally separate project because I now have those relationships. So from a producer standpoint, I don't know what the value is for me to give over an agency fee on something that I could sell directly. Right. But as a director, I have interest in working with people who, for example, are in talent within the CAA world. It's a very easy, quick line to what's the story on this? What's their availability? can you get me a call with their people so that we can see if there's something that can happen there?
Mm-hmm.
The other place that agents are really helpful for is just industry standard. And if you hear word about a project that you want to be considered for, that they should, if they're smart, be thinking about you for that already. But that's where you call your agent and you say, listen, I heard that this is happening. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. And so I know that a lot of people do approach you, and a lot of networks approach you directly now for projects.
Right.
Do you think that's, well, you obviously have your particular style of filmmaking. Tell me about whether you were ever conscious of creating your particular style, or whether it just evolved, and have you ever reflected back on that?
I'm conscious constantly of it because I actually don't know that the style that we have truly reflects my style, because I have been in partnership for a long time. And I think together we have had a very particular approach to storytelling that tends to be, it was grounded in observational filmmaking, but it was also, I mean, if you look at our films, a great deal of them involve archive. I mean, I think any documentary does right now, but it's, there are a handful of our films that really were straight verite.
Right.
And I think that the one that we just completed is closer to that. And I think, when I think about visual style, I have a different approach. I embrace natural light. I embrace funky interview setups. And by funky, I say, for example, I don't necessarily need everyone's eye line to be exactly the same in the frame. I don't need things it depends on the project, but I don't need things to look as you and I do in these frames as we're talking with each other. I just shot a film that has a far looser hand.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I loved it because it was much more immersive in that world. What I do think is singular when I look back at our work, and I think, again, for people who are trying to figure out how to brand themselves, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
People don't know what to bring to us, except that they know we're adept at interviews and good character, finding and opening up sort of a story that can be really rich through connecting with the people that we're filming. I think we're very adept at that. Joe Berlinger made a name early on for crime. Morgan Neville made a name early on for music. And I think that, RJ Cutler, who just did the Billie Eilish film, he's generally known for things that are breezy and entertaining. I mean, he did The War Room, but he took a very serious subject and made it incredibly riveting. But not riveting from a social issue. Oh my God, I feel so beleaguered by all the things that are going wrong. It was much more like, I'm going to take you on a crazy ride. And that's sort of, I feel like if I look at RJ's work, I know I will be entertained. If I look at our work for a while, we were getting pigeonholed as social issue filmmakers because we had done wrongful conviction story. We had done a genocide story. And a lot of people still come to us saying, I want to work on stories that matter.
Right.
That hasn't gone away, but I do think we've evolved so that our stories are much more, they live in that space of entertainment a little bit more now.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't say entertainment with, any disparagement. I just think that we want to make films that you want to watch.
And your love of narrative helps with that too, right? Because that's really brought in with whatever real people that you're interviewing. You want to see an arc, right, of
Absolutely.
their journey. Yeah. So now you've been directing and writing and pitching filmmaking and making films for so long. What are decisions now that you're making without thinking that you really had to be conscious of when you were starting out?
How to write a pitch letter. I mean, honestly, it's sort of a thing. I just sent out about 12 emails this morning. I have a better sense of what someone on the other side wants to hear, what their bandwidth is for words on a page. And most people aren't reading right now. Most people just want to watch something. Give them something really good to watch that's under 3 minutes, and then get the meeting in the room. So I feel like I'm much better at that. I'm also better at, because you have the relationships, you don't need to front load it with, this is who I am and this is what this is about. It's just that for a variety of reasons, I want you to take a look at this because I'd love to explore this with you. And then it's just a very different way of doing that. I also think that I've become better at writing log lines and synopses. I mean, I think I've also become better at knowing audiences and knowing where certain kinds of projects might fit. So
we've just got a note from Lauren. Hold on, we need to just pause
yeah,
for
she had
a second.
a little glitch.
want to make sure that everyone can hear us.
Is the live stream just down?
I don't know. It's still saying live on ours, but let's see.
It's funny. It's like the necessary burden of networking this past week has all been Doc NYC. And yeah. But it's been really great to see everyone. It feels oddly normal. I mean, post-COVID, it was like we're in this huge event hall. There was a big memorial service for Diane Wireman yesterday. I mean, people are gathering.
It's nice, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, I've been doing some live readings for a new pilot show and also a play, and everybody's just been in the room. It's been like the energy has been so high because it's so exciting to have real actors sitting there with no masks on, and
yep,
so
makes a difference.
Yeah. Oh, Lauren. No, we can't hear you, Lauren. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to just show up. It looks like it's working again. Is it showing live on yours?
It is. I hope everyone can hear us.
Okay, I'm going to disappear, and I'll text you if there's any glitches. But just for a second there, I thought that we were interrupted, so I had to reconnect the feed. Sorry about that, Annie.
No worries.
I haven't seen any questions yet, so if you could forward them on to me.
Yeah.
All right, I will do right now. Thanks, guys. Sorry about that.
No worries, Lauren.
I mean, given that it's 1:30, I'm happy to start to shift to questions if people have stuff. Or you may have more, Kathleen. But
I have more, but so I'll go with mine as soon as we can start seeing them come through, I'll go to that.
Sure.
I wanted to. We talked a lot about you and I about making ends meet as a filmmaker and actually making this a viable career and something we can rely on in terms of making a living. Should we start a conversation about that?
I'm happy to do that. So again, I just remember it goes back to when I walked away from the paycheck and I was like, oh God, and now I got to work on this job. That was terrifying. I mean, I remember thinking I had no savings, and I would tell myself every day in the morning just to sort of give myself mental sanity. I would tell myself a lie. I was like, you have $100,000 in your bank account. And that was that weird calm. It wasn't true, but I would tell myself in the morning so that I could walk out the door not feeling panicked about having to say yes to something and trying to figure out what that thing is. But the reality is you have to pay your rent. You have to do everything else. And I ended up, I was unafraid, and I still am unafraid to say yes. If I'm desperate, I will say yes to anything. It doesn't have to be for that long. So, I can do transcripts for you, and that's $100. I could do there are times when I just needed cash and I didn't have time to sign on for a full-on waitressing job for a period.
Right.
As you get further in your career, you get a little bit better about pitching yourself for better payments. But making a living for me was always, it's interesting because it was only, how to say this without totally discouraging people. I remember when I first started dating my husband, one of our first dates, he said, did you ever actually think you could make a living at documentaries? And I said, well, I did. He's like, oh boy. And he was just let me educate you. Cause he also came from the film side. And I still think documentaries are hard. I think the rise of nonfiction and the rise of television have made it very easy to make nonfiction. I think documentaries as their own film are still very hard. And they're not hugely, for the majority of the films, not hugely lucrative. But then you have films like Questlove, Summer of Soul. It sold for $15 million. It should have sold for 25.
Yeah.
There's the film that was made by unknown filmmakers that's coming out on Amazon that just sold for, was it 12 million or more? It's about the Afghanistan vet who goes to rehab endangered ocelots in South America. First time filmmakers. And that film was completely a bidding war. So it's, again, I think trying to figure out, are you reading a marketplace? Are you just stumbling into a remarkable story? And I'm still trying to figure out who was guiding them into that sale. And when I have the information, I will report back. But we were talking about it this past week at a conference. But the day-to-day making a living thing is tricky. I think just figuring out what you have that's of value. Sometimes it's an apartment and you Airbnb it for a month and you stay with a friend. or your partner, or whatever it might be, and you make that happen.
Location for a film.
Exactly. Or, a friend of mine was really good at the time. She actually was catering. She was making dinners, and she was like, it was sort of, what is the thing that you can do that's a talent or an asset that you have that you can make short-term change from while you figure out the longer term play?
Right.
That's always what I did when I was like at my absolute most desperate.
I feel like it's hard to I always feel like in my own life that going into a project because you think it's going to be have this fabulous end result, it never actually works out that way. You have to be really, excited and invested in the beginning of it, and they're usually the ones that have success.
Right. I think, well, that's true. I think there are three things. It's like, is it going to give you psychic income? Is it going to give you real income? Or is it going to move the needle on your career? Those are the three things you have to think about with every project. And I think that, for the people who are lucky enough to have okay, I'll take a 12-week gig and it's going to be a good paycheck, but I hate the thing I'm making. Hold your nose, take the money, pocket it, and free yourself up to do the thing you really care about.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't think, those are always the questions that I have in my head about how I approach a project now. But I do think that there was a tide that turned about money making. And I will say this, grants will never pay you a fee. What will pay you a fee is to make a film for as little as you possibly can and sell it for a lot more. License it, sell it, monetize it through pay-per-view on whatever platform you can. GoFundMe's, all of those things can potentially, cover your film. But when you think about how you're going to pay yourself, it's often either in a project that's fully financed where you have a line item written into the budget, or when you get ready to sell your project, make sure that your fee is baked into deferrals that are in first position. Because for a long time, crew, directors, the people who are the creatives, because they had a percentage ownership in the film, they always push their fees down to the bottom. And there are certain groups that still fund and will push back on that. But as much as you can advocate for yourself, if you didn't take a fee during production, make sure that you're in the first place to recoup. So, yeah.
I have, okay, so we have some questions coming through here. This year, Lauren, our founder, says we have an unprecedented amount of documentary films and web series being submitted. How do you've been involved in a lot of film festivals?
Sorry, my phone, and I thought it was turned off.
You've been involved in film festivals. How do you make the most out of the festivals when you do attend and when you are part of them?
Well, here's what's really different right now. I think because I was talking to people who were part of Sundance last year, which was hybrid, and it was a very different experience for them. I think it was a great experience for audiences, but it's harder for filmmakers to get traction and to get the press and to use festivals as much when they're not in person. Doc NYC, which is happening right now, Tom Powers has done a remarkable job. He was the former programmer at Toronto Film Festival, and he still is involved with Toronto. But he has basically created a niche that is its own machine now. And so if you're a documentary filmmaker, the conferences, the screenings, the sidebars, it's all happening this week right now, primarily out of the IFC Center. It is valid. Like, he has created a world there. And I think that people can use that festival to find crew, to advance their own perception in the industry, to create friendships and build alliances with people, to make themselves and their skills available to other people who might be looking for someone who worked in that subject matter or can do X, Y, and Z. I mean, it was so satisfying the other night. I can't tell you, it's so nice to be back past COVID, but I walked into a reception and I saw 4 camera people who've worked for me over the years. And we all got together and we just caught up on each other's projects. And it was like, oh, and so now I'm bringing one person in to shoot this thing for me here. And I've got it's just what can happen over the course of a 45-minute connect at a festival like that is remarkable. Yeah. But how do you use festivals? They're free PR. And you also use them to, communicate with whoever your stakeholders, donors, supporters are. It's just, there's a lot that you can use with the festivals. And it's I still think right now they're incredibly important for filmmakers, hugely important.
So thank you, Lauren, for everything you do for us filmmakers and putting these on. I guess that's a really important point, is that you have developed over your career a group of crew members, DPs, sound people, lighting people, et cetera, who you love working with and who are your first preference. That comes from networking, but it also comes from, like, you know, someone here has asked, what's the best advice for getting started in docs? And I think it's about just getting on set with someone and making fans, right?
Totally. And it's so much about, and for example, you know, again, I hope this is relevant, but we had shot a bunch of things and there was a young woman who was an AC, you know, her first AC on some of the projects that we shot. And no one was going to her with this idea that she could be the DP. But it just happened that during COVID, I was, you know, dealing with a bunch of restrictions on a project I wanted to shoot. And this woman, who is immensely talented, happened to be available and close by. And she shot this incredibly beautiful film with me. And so now I just put her up for 3 other projects and she's getting DP credits on things. And so again, like, it could just take that one project. It could be you working on set. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you want to be near to that person, just make yourself available.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean,
how can I help? What can I do?
Yeah, during COVID, we've, as you know, you and I have found it very difficult finding crew because everyone is booked now. Every single person is booked. So if you have some skills, put yourself up on, you know, Production Hub or Staff Me Up and get yourself on set, because we're desperate for people. And I know that I've definitely, there are at least 2 women that I have promoted into higher positions just because, listen, you had a great energy on set, you're willing to learn, let's throw you in. And now they're going off and they've got those credits. So that was really important.
And I was just thinking, like, Brown Girls Doc Mafia. I mean, like, we've tapped into that group quite a bit. Like, it's a really interesting time. And I also will say, if you are a filmmaker of color, this is your time. I know so many people who are so hungry to support and to bring people in. And I had this conversation at Netflix, you know, with the Netflix exec 2 days ago. And we were talking about, they have a couple shorts that are up for consideration for this award cycle. And he said, you know, we'd love to get a short from you, Annie, but honestly, we want shorts from emerging filmmakers. We are looking to support filmmakers who we want to have a larger relationship with, and we do it through shorts. So again, it's really, and he started OpDocs at New York Times years before, but again, and other friends have been doing shorts for OpDocs too. So there are really interesting places and points of entry right now. Sam Knowles, her first project was The Thin Blue Line for OpDocs. She just directed part of a 4-part HBO series and is in high demand right now.
Yeah.
And that was over a year and a half, just 18 months. Her career has gone like, so.
Yeah, it's incredible. And on that, actually, because, you know, along with Sam Knowles and myself, you mentor a lot of up-and-coming filmmakers. How important is that for you in the development of those people under you?
God, it's so important, because that's how I had my first jobs. I had people who, I just remember cold calling people early on and then going to lunch with them and just having, often it's, the best thing about mentorship is that you're a sounding board, you help people, and then when the right opportunity arrives, you can deliver it to them. You're not always the person who's going to fix it for the mentee. Like, I have mentor, you know, like, relationships with people who are desperate for jobs. And I'm like, I just want to know you. I want to know what you're about, what you're looking for. I might not have something now, but, you know, for example, someone who I was speaking to like 6 months ago, I was just able to put her into a podcast project that she's so thrilled about, but it didn't happen immediately, but it happened 6 months later. And so again, like, I'm happy to, like, I just think mentorship is, sometimes it's a slow burn, but it's valuable for me to have that relationship too, because then they're going to bring me people too down the line who I might need help with. So
yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, you know, you mentor me, I mentor others, and it just feels like I also learn a lot from people that I mentor. You know, they think differently than me. They're hungrier than me in some sense. There's so many things that I can learn from that relationship as well. So I think that it's really important. I know I've sat in a lot of women in film forums, and I've had arguments with women who have felt like, well, I had to go over those hurdles and smash through those doors, so you should have to as well. And I don't believe in that at all. You know, I had to go over a hurdle, so you shouldn't have to. That's the point.
I think that's part of it. I just realized I'm looking at the question that Lauren had posted in the chat. I'm just jumping back for a second about advice for applying to festivals. I do think that if there's a way of talking about the relevancy of your project. However, whenever you pitch it, whenever you write your submission letter or your director's statement, one, your project should look and be compelling. Like it just should, it better be good. But then if you're going to try to rise above, I often think that it's what was the full, sincere point of connection that you had with that project. Bring your heart into that letter so that, again, it's like, it was the old, Wordsworth phrase, like what we have loved, others will love, and we'll show them how. Show the festival committee why they need to love your project, why it will connect with audiences, who you're speaking to through your film. That's really important. Not just social impact or anything else, but like, why was this story incredibly valuable for you to tell and put the time into it and do it? Just think about that when you write your statements.
And that's, again, it ties back to what we were saying about do projects that you love from the beginning, because then that end part of it will be easier for you.
Yeah, it's just an extension of you. So
yeah. And someone's asking, actually, they're going back to your Joan Rivers documentary, just how the experience of working with Joan.
Joan was tremendous. So Joan came into our world, you know this, Kathleen, but for people who don't, my film partner, Ricky, her mother had met Joan. They were women of a similar age. She had met Joan in Connecticut, of all things, at like a dinner party. And they became fast friends. They would go to the theater together. They hung out in New York together. And they were definitely, both women were kind of iconoclasts in their own way. And she had said to Ricky, you should reach out to Joan. I think she'd be a good subject for a film. So, we went over, we had an initial meeting with her. I think she was wary. On one hand, she likes to have a lot of control, but what I credit Joan with was trusting the process. She basically gave over she knows how, she helped shoot that film. I mean, she knows how to play the camera. She's incredibly real, incredibly generous. It's heartbreaking that she's gone. She was very funny, very fair, actually. And I think that she holds grudges, but she knew, part of it was we also lucked out. We had, Seth and Charles, we had this wonderful camera and sound team where there were these young men who we just sort of had them on a fat retainer over a period of time so that if it was like an hour shoot here or a 2-hour shoot there, it wasn't booking crew for a whole day, but they could just run over and shoot with her in the apartment. She loved having them around, so again, it's like, that was a really lovely vibe, and it just, and she was good about, flagging opportunities for us to film. There was never resistance there. I think what the resistance came at the end when she saw the film for the first time and wanted to put her fingerprints on it a bit. And she didn't have that opportunity. But we did need to have her sign the release. And we'd waited until the end for her to have that moment to see the film. And I've talked about this with a lot of filmmakers. I really believe in having the participation of your subject, not a paid participation, but to having the buy-in, unless for some reason it's truly adversarial and you're going after someone to take them down for whatever bad deeds. But if you spent the time making a film about and with someone, they should be part of it. And I'm not saying that they should have total editorial control, but like my friend just did the film on Twyla Tharp, and he said she should have the choice over her best dance. She knows the dance far better than I ever will. So why would I not bring her into that part of the edit and have her help me with those scenes? Right. In the same way with Joan, we gave her a chance to watch the film and give us her thoughts. And we did make 2 modest edits based on that conversation.
And I think we were talking about personal style before, and the years that I've been working with you, that's what I found. You are very close to the people you make films about. Yeah. You have relationships with them. You have relationships that withstand, after the film, 10, 15 years later, you're still friends with them, and I think that's really testament to how you make good films, because the people trust you.
And it's, none of these are easy films to make. So you better, hopefully you enjoy the people that you're doing them with down the line. So,
yeah. Can we talk quickly about your first narrative film, Tully? It was a while ago, but it received so many awards and it was so well received. And, why did you, I guess we did talk about your transition into the docs, but did you ever think about doing narrative again?
I did, and I do. And in fact, I'm just putting together a writer's group for myself, because again, it's like the accountability, it's like, it's one thing to say I'm working on something, but it's one thing to have to show up every 3 weeks and say, okay, here are my pages. I've actually worked on it. Yeah. Tully came together because I had met a friend of mine, and my colleague through Barbara Koppel's group. So again, it came out of documentary, but we'd worked together in an office, and we both had always wanted to do narrative, and we were always looking at short stories and underlying things to develop. And when Tully came together, she had optioned a story that was in an O. Henry Prize collection, and she was working on it. Again, some people just have vision and are like, I want to do it all myself. I'm going to be the auteur. Like I know Daryl Ween and his girlfriend Zoe Lister, like they just do their own stuff. But Hillary was a bit more like me in that she didn't trust herself at first. So she brought in someone to help write the screenplay with her. And then the two of us were, we were working together side by side, and we were debating about who was going to direct this. And she was like, well, why don't we go to our friend Brett? And I was like, why are we going to give it away? One of us should direct it. And literally we sat in my car, we were alternate side parking, and we flipped a coin. And I said, heads, I direct, tails, you direct. And it was tails, and Hillary directed it. And that project, when it came out, it was a really hard, it was a hard landing because we'd won all of the festivals. We were up for 4 Spirit Awards. We were like the little engine that could. And it had Julianne Nicholson, who was sublime in Mayor of Easttown just now. And it had a really beautiful cast. But we had sold it at the Toronto Film Festival, and the group that took international sales rights, there was a scandal in the company, and it had gone into receivership. And that company had all of Sony's titles as well. So we sat behind all of the bigger fish as they clawed to get their projects out of receivership. And so by the time we had gone through the legal work to get our film free to distribute so that there wasn't a lien against it, it was a year and a half later. And it's like in the film cycle, you don't want to release a year and a half after you won all the awards. So it came out at a time, I mean, I wish it had come out when, right when we were on the top of everything, but so that was hard. So we couldn't pay our investors back, and our investors were fine. I mean, they all took a wash on it. They were able to, but it's never a great feeling to tell someone, thanks for your money.
Yeah.
Nothing to give you back except for a lovely film with your name on it. So that's when I went back into docs. I was like, okay, I need to figure out, I'm going to raise, next time I do it, it's going to be I have to give my investors money back.
Yeah. Well, that's a definite learning curve, isn't it?
Yep.
Someone's asking here, can you talk a bit more about going from making indie films to when people start coming to you? What that feels?
That was a really critical year, and it was funny because it happened, and it wasn't something that we could have easily predicted. We had finished The Trials of Daryl Hunt, and that was a film that took 14 years to finish for everybody who's like doing the math out there. We got that to Sundance. It was the wrongful conviction story. And again, we were so blind. We had no idea what we were doing. We got shortlisted for the Academy Awards. We had no press. We got nominated for Gotham Awards. We were getting all sorts of calls about the film, but we were had we been more had grown up at that time or strategic or in the loop, we probably could have made different things happen even with that film. But when that film was getting a lot of attention, a lot of heat, we were in post on a project called The Devil Came on Horseback, because that was a project, again, when I took a flyer and I left the job, Ricky and I, we rented, and I kid you not, a very large equipment closet in a very cheap office on 26th Street because it was all we could afford. We were like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, if we're going to make this real, we need an office. We're not working in your apartment or my apartment. We're going to have an office where we can have an edit room. And an edit room was just like an iMac and, some speakers. But we were paying rent. And we were saying, again, yes to everything. I brought in a bunch of really random short-term projects, like school fundraising videos and other stuff over here. But we were covering our rent. So while we were finishing The Trials of Daryl Hunt, which we paid for primarily on grants, we had met this young cameraman who had been an African Union monitor who took all these crazy photographs in Darfur. So we fast-tracked that. We applied to IDFA. We, again, wrote more grants. We started making that movie. That film got into Sundance the year after The Trials of Daryl Hunt, and that's when we started getting phone calls. So we'd had 2 back-to-back films at Sundance, both of which had sold pretty well. And the sale to HBO didn't hurt. That's also what helped us keep our lights on.
Yeah. Someone has come
and then all of a sudden people are like, oh, okay, let's bring them in. And that's when you do the rounds, and that's when all the people want to meet with you. And so, yeah.
Goodness. Someone has asked here, Annie, is there a subject or person you've worked with in the past that you'd love to revisit now, years later?
I would say Daryl Hunt, but he killed himself. he would be the person I would have liked to have revisited. He had such a hard life after he got out. In terms of people who are living, it's interesting. Pat and Jess, who were the couple at the Heart of Marathon,
Yeah.
I am still in touch with them, and I actually think that their life now is really interesting, where they still are in their marriage and how they're navigating. I think they're phenomenal. Oddly, I also think R.A. Dickey. I mean, like, he's just like, he really understood story. And again, when we were making Knuckleball, there was something really incredible about him. But it just, yeah, I don't know. It's funny now because I'm working in a couple of different projects. And I just think that the people who who just are willing to open themselves up on camera, it's rare that you find that trust element.
Mm.
And when you do, it never leaves you. Like, you feel like people really gave you something, and it's such an intimate space to be with someone. And I feel like we got that with Jess, and we got that with,
Yeah.
So.
So someone's asking a question about a story that you would love to tell. Is there someone's story that you'd love to tell? And I know a little bit about what you've been working on during the pandemic that was very close to your heart. And that's something that's in a way indie as well. Like, no one, you just made that by yourself. Right. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I haven't been thinking biopic per se. I mean, I'm always really curious about music projects. Like, there are certain music stories. I mean, I think someone's doing the Randy Newman story right now, but I'm always fascinated about what it is to be inside and score a film and all of that. But more importantly, this was such a wonderful thing that happened. And again, looking for opportunities when you don't realize they're right in front of you. Pandemic happens. A friend of mine is a dancer. He's like, I think I'm going to pull this off. I have a bunch of New York City ballet dancers who haven't worked since February. We're going to do the Nutcracker. We're going to do it at this crazy house upstate. And I'm going to raise the money. I'm going to put my friends back to work. And we're going to be in a pod for 7 weeks. And we're going to do this. I was like, do you want to film it? But at first I was like, is there a film there? I don't know. But then it ended up being this incredible magical story thing. So we tumbled into it, and it's really, it's like a fairy tale. And so this is a project that we made for nothing with 3 of us. And that was it. I was running craft service. I was, running a camera on a gimbal. It was just, and we were getting COVID tests every other day. But it was, that was a project I couldn't have seen coming, and I'm so glad I did it. And now I'm actually talking to a couple of people about new projects that are kind of early stages. There's someone actually there's a famous couple that I'm interested in their dynamic, and if there's a story there. I don't know that there's a story there, but there are people who I just reached out to CAA to see if we could get an introduction, because they're also rep there. That's where agents are also handy. So.
Well, you have done a lot of preliminary interviews with very famous people and walked away and had to make the hard decision. There isn't actually a story here that we could sustain a 2-hour, film with, or whatever. Right. And is that just instinctive in you, or?
It's instinctive. You also know how someone is going to be. I mean, sort of like, they're either going to give you what you need or they're not. And if they're not, then you have to figure out how you're going to use what they are willing to give you. And
it's often hard when people are in front of the camera a lot. They know how to put on a face and tell their own story, so they can engineer it. And you don't, as a documentary filmmaker, get any real, authentic energy from them.
Right. I mean, I think, it's funny because I was just thinking about, I just had a breakfast with a potential subject. Again, for people who are thinking about documentary. And I also think if you're writing too, there's something to be said about just being in the world for a while before you figure out the story, just to really understand the nuances. And in doc, I think it's even more important to have time without a camera with people, spending time just knowing them, so that you then know what to watch for, know what to think about capturing. And it was an interesting conversation, because I realized that the person who I'm thinking about for another film right now, she has limits, but she has depths, and her limits are more health related right now. So, yep.
Interesting. Well, we come to the end. Are there any sort of last minute nuggets that you want to leave with our filmmakers?
I don't know, does anyone have any other questions? I'm just looking in the chat.
We've answered all of them.
Okay. I mean, I just think that it's everyone wants to work in docs right now, which is interesting to me. Like I get so many calls from people, but then I also think that once you're in it, it's not that glamorous, as you know. And I think that so much of it is, I think the hardest thing about documentary is that often if it's verite, you're putting someone else's life in front of your own. You're prioritizing someone else's story. And if it's, you're kind of having to drop things that, when things are happening, depending on how the kinds of films you choose to make. And that's shifted for me now as a, mother of a 9-year-old. I want to have more availability to her. I will probably drop back in again and do some of the more immersive documentaries in the future.
Yeah.
But right now there's something really satisfying about finding stories that can be told in ways that work for me. It's sort of like a weird thing. I was talking about this with Liz Garbus, who just did Becoming Cousteau. And it was an incredible delight of a film to make because she had archive, she had animators.
Yeah.
She didn't have to travel. It was kind of a really interesting project for her.
Well, when we made Epstein, for instance, remember how that took over our lives because
Totally. The news,
we're about to deliver our last episode and Ghislaine got arrested and the whole thing had to change. We'd finished the edit. We were in color and mix, weren't we, or something, and then Ghislaine got arrested and we sent film crews to all the places where we thought she was. You went one place where you went, we're all, and we had to change that entire episode, and that does take over your life.
It can. It totally can, for better, for worse. It's interesting because right now I have 5 different projects that I'm considering that are and I was actually looking at footage on another one that just came through today. And
do you still go through that checklist of what are the 3, which part is this money, is this psychic energy, is this,
going to change my career. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Always. Those are the questions I always ask. So
amazing. Thank you for your time.
Okay. All right.
Miss Lauren, you're on mute.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you guys again. I really, really appreciate this. This will be recorded, so I'll send you a link as well, just so you have it. Okay. Just because you guys have such great lighting. No, I'm just kidding. You look so great on camera. No, but I really appreciate you, Annie, for taking the time. And Kathleen, I know you always do so much research. And even though you know each other, you always come so prepared. And I really, really appreciate it. What a great way to kick off the festival. Sorry about the glitch in the middle. I was able to quickly stream to our YouTube channel, which worked, which was great. So people were able to catch up. Thank you so much, you guys.
Lauren, thank you, and congratulations on your fest.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was so fitting because, like I said, this is an unprecedented year, and it just so happens that so many of them are from New York, which is great because it's been 2020 was we were virtual as well, but the big winners were from Canada. There's different funding systems in different places, and so to see New York bounce back like this with some pretty heartbreaking stories over the past year. But also really good ones from around the world. We have some great documentaries from France, everything. So I appreciate this.
That's awesome. I will say it's the nonfiction time right now. It is.
I agree.
In terms of placement for films right now.
I agree. I will send you a link because our films will be up for a week. So if you ever want to take a look at some of them, I'll send you that as well.
Please do. I would love to. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kathleen. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Bye. Have a good one.
See you guys.
Thanks.